Hello and welcome back, finally, to The Drag Detective. I am sorry I was gone for a little while, but my body decided to shut down and throw me in the garbage, so I did not have a voice for like a week and a half, which if you listen to the first episode of the podcast, you can watch my voice crumble into nothing before your very ears. By the end of that podcast, I had nothing left to give. I sounded like a wrinkly, crusty old man. No shade to the wrinkly, crusty old men out there, but finally, I sort of mostly have my voice back, and we can do a follow-up to the riggory of Drag Race Down Under. I know none of us want to think about this again, but once I put this video out, I am ridding myself of any memories of this season, and we can all move on with our lives. So today we are going to talk about what would have happened if Drag Race Down Under was not rigged. Now, as always, I am using both my personal opinions, the personal opinions that I hear all over Twitter and Instagram and Reddit, as well as the poll results that I got from you guys when I did the poll to come up with what the season would have looked like. And, let's just say it's not a little bit different. It's not a lot bit different. It's a completely different season, which is exactly what we all want. So hopefully you will enjoy this video. But before we get into it, lots of housekeeping. Make sure you are following me on Instagram. Make sure you are following me on Twitter. Now that I'm alive again, I'll be more active on there. And also, if you are able, maybe go pay my Patreon a visit. We have a Discord server. We have videos that are patrons only. And if you want to be a guest on my new podcast, sign up for the Patreon and you will get the option to do so. So go check that out. Also, if you have not checked out the podcast, I removed the video from YouTube because YouTube's algorithm absolutely hated me for uploading an hour-long video. So I am going to put it on my second channel, which will be linked in the description below. Also, it is now live on Spotify and on Apple Music, so if you want to hear me and my best friend talk shit on the first 2 episodes of All-Star 6, we're not really talking shit. We love the season so far. Go check out the podcast. That is everything, I think. So now we can go on to the video. I had to turn off my fan so it didn't mess with the audio, but it is so hot out today and my room is sweltering. So if you hear a thud, it's probably me passing out on the floor. But no, we'll get through this. We'll get through this. I think a lot of people are hoping and have said multiple times that if the season wasn't rigged, our Kiwi queens would probably be the top 3. Let's see if that would be true. Starting off with episode 1. Now, I'm just going to make a quick disclaimer for this episode because I'm sure a lot of you are going to be mad at this. I kept Karen as the winner for this episode. And if you watched my Riggory of Drag Race Down Under video, you kind of can guess why. I think that Karen and Art Simone, who I think a lot of people really, and based on the poll results, I know a lot of people really wanted to win this challenge. But from my perspective, and I know other people also have this perspective, Art and Karen both did really, really well in different aspects of the challenge. I think that Karen did a lot better bringing characters to the runway and showing off her personality on the runway, while I think that Art was way better at having, very extravagant, cool garments. Kind of what one did well in, they also lacked in the other thing. I personally think that either of these queens could have won, and I wouldn't have seen it as rigged. If Art won, it would have been fine. If Karen won, in my head, it would have been fine. So I'm only changing things here that I see are blatantly rigged, and in my opinion, Karen winning this challenge just isn't rigged, because she did do well. Art also did well. They both deserve the win, but they chose Karen, and I don't really have a problem with that. I don't see that as riggory, like we will pretty quickly. Karen is going to win here, and like I always say, there's normally not much riggory in the first few episodes because they still are figuring out what queens they want to push, what queens they don't mind losing early. The only other thing that I changed from this episode was Scarlett Adams had no right being in the top. Her looks to me were the definition of safe, and she had a huge, I guess you would say, blemish in one of her looks that she didn't even really try that hard to cover up. And I saw that as like a major ooh. So I think Scarlett would be safe if this was not rigged. But to me, it was very clear they wanted to push her as our fashion queen of the season. So in her place, I put etc., who I think had two really beautiful, high concept, high quality looks that just weren't really given the time of day by Rue or the judges, which seems to be a running theme in etc. story arc. So here's our episode. Not much changes. Electroshock did not do that well. JoJo Zaho did not do well. They're going to lip sync, and Elektra is going to eliminate JoJo. So let's move on to episode 2, which was the Snatch Game. I had a big issue with the fact that they threw most of the queens in the bottom and put them up for elimination. I just didn't think this was that bad of a Snatch Game. There were certain performances that I think were fine that were in the bottom, such as Electroshock, but as I said, I think that was just because RuPaul did not get the reference of who she was playing. So I think Anita obviously won, and I think we would have, if this was a regularly judged episode, which I think it should have been, our top 3, along with Anita, would be Electroshock and etc. The other person who could have been in the top was Ketamine, but in my opinion, Ketamine started off pretty weak, but then by the end was strong, whereas Elektra, I think, was pretty solid throughout the whole performance. So I just put Elektra in the top here. Then we have Ketamine safe along with Maxi Shield and Scarlett Adams. They really didn't show Scarlett Adams much, so I just put her as safe. And Maxi Shield, they really kind of ripped to shreds, but in my opinion, she wasn't funny, but she had a great characterization. So the fact that she had one of those two means that she's already better than the bottom 3 in this episode. So let's talk about them. We have Coco Jumbo, Karen from Finance, and Art Simone. I ended up putting Karen from Finance as low, and it was kind of hard because they didn't show Karen necessarily flopping. It just wasn't funny, but she wasn't cringy. Whereas Coco and Art, I think, were more on like the cringy spectrum of Snatch Game performances. Nothing about them said Lizzo or Bindi Irwin at all, except for like the accent that Art had. So like any of these 3 could have been in the bottom and it would have been fine. But in my opinion, I guess that Karen was the least bad, so she's just going to be in the low position. And then obviously we have Coco sending home Art Simone, in this case, for good. So let's move on to the Girl Groups Challenge, Queens Down Under. This episode, a mess, we all know it is. I really didn't know whether it would be fair or not to judge as teams like they do in UK with this exact challenge, because there wasn't a team that necessarily stood out as like way better. I think there were highlights in each group, and I think that there were, for lack of a better word, flops in each group. So there wasn't to me a team that was like all out way better than the other. So I decided to not judge it in teams, but that was my initial like gut reaction of what I was going to do in this episode until I broke it down a little bit, and I was like, neither team was really better than the other. They both had their great moments and they both had their faults. So in my opinion, the best 3 in this challenge, and your guys' opinion too from the poll results, was our Kiwi queens, Anita, Ketamine, and Electroshock. And I was so happy to see that you guys agreed with me with what I had said on the previous episode of this, The Riggory of Drag Race Down Under, that Electroshock was the standout of her team, not because she was necessarily like pushing for more screen time, but because she performed the best, because she actively was the best performer. She had a great verse. She looked probably up to this point the best she's looked, and she showed off her amazing dance moves. So I was very happy to see that you guys thought Elektra should have won this as well. So Elektra is going to win this challenge. No other queen in this challenge was a bigger like highlight where I was like, oh wow, she is slaying. Now, Ketamine and Anita Wig'lit both looked great in the challenge and had great verses, so I think they both definitely deserved their high placements here. For safe, I put Scarlett Adams and etc. etc. To me, their verses and everything about the performance was fine. I really didn't get much from them. Like I wasn't like excited to watch them in the performance. So to me, like they didn't do anything wrong, but they didn't do anything stellar either. So they're just going to be safe. And that leaves our bottom three of Maxi Shield, Coco Jumbo, and Karen from Finance. To me, Karen from Finance was the absolute worst, hands down, in this challenge. Her verse was so bad. Her look was so weird, and her performance was stiff. Now, there are definitely things I could point out in both of the other performances from Maxi Shield and Coco Jumbo that I thought were positives. I thought Coco really performed well. She looked gorgeous and she performed well, but her verse was really bad. Maxi Shield, I don't think performed as bad, but her verse was better than Coco's. So to me, I put Coco in the bottom because of all the elements that went into this challenge. She actually flopped one of them with her verse, whereas Maxi did average to below average in all of them, but I don't think she had necessarily an aspect of her performance that was horrific, like totally bad. So I left Maxi as low, and we have Coco lip syncing against Karen. Obviously, Karen is going home here as she should have. And we move on to the RuCyCLED challenge. Now, I really looked for information on if Coco Jumbo can sew, but as we know, none of her looks were all that great. Some of them I really liked. I mean, her Ursula was fine. I actually really liked her Bogan, but none of her looks were stellar, I would say. Which makes me think in this look-based challenge, she would probably struggle. And at this point, she'd been in the bottom 2 weeks in a row. I think Coco would be probably in the bottom here as well. Now, this challenge was really hard for me because I don't think anyone necessarily flopped. I don't think anyone looked bad, except for Karen, who isn't here now. So it's kind of, who do you put in the bottom with Coco Jumbo? I looked to the poll, and I'm not sure I necessarily agree with this, but I also couldn't think of a better option. So I guess Ketamine would be in the bottom two here. Her look was not the worst. You could tell it was well made. It wasn't falling apart. There was thought that was put into it. It definitely went with her aesthetic, but it just was on the more basic side, I think. And then also I put Anita Wig'lit as low. Mostly because the only other option was etc. etc. and I thought that etc. looked better than Anita, but Anita still did not deserve to be in the bottom two. So Anita is going to be low here. And let's look at the tops now. Top three, in this case, I think would be Electra Shock, Maxi Shield, and Scarlett Adams. Say what you want about Scarlett Adams. She looked beautiful. It was a concept. It looked really nice. And Electra Shock, again, had a concept, used something we hadn't seen before with the neckties. And I think this is, at this point, the best that she's looked. Those two, I think, would be in the top, but we all agree Maxi Shield looked incredible. This Vivienne Westwood look with the hair and the makeup, everything about this was a complete vision. It was well made, it was well tailored, and I truly have no complaints on this look. So I think this is a well-deserved win for Maxi Shield. So now let's move on to the god-awful yeast commercial challenge. This was a mess to try and figure out how to judge. We have Anita Wig'lit still in the competition, and it was basically you guys all said she was going to win this challenge, which I fully agree. She just had to do better than Electra Shock, and yes, compared to who else was there, Electra Shock did really well, but I just don't think it was, like, unbeatable. I think Anita probably for sure could have done better than Electra Shock here. But again, our Kiwi Queens are going to be in the top three because Ketamine also had an amazing commercial. So that is our top three with Anita Wig'lit winning this challenge, her second challenge win of the season. Now we have our bottom three, etc., Maxi Shield, and Scarlett Adams. Now, I really enjoyed etc's commercial, but I think I'm in the minority there, so I did put her in the bottom with Maxi Shield. I think Maxi had the worst of any of these queens, so To me, etc., I think did better than Scarlett, but looking at the general consensus, not everyone agrees with me. So I'm just going to assume I am impartial to Scarlett Adams here. Yeah, we're trying to keep this objective. So we're going to have etc., and Maxi Shield lip sync here. But neither of them are going to go home because Scarlett is going to be called out for her horrific actions and get her ass sent home. In my personal opinion, if you have done racist acts frequently and after knowing that they are wrong, that you are in the wrong, if you continue the behavior, you do not deserve to have a platform, especially in a queer space, especially with so many members of the BIPOC community in this queer space, and especially in a television program where so many members of the BIPOC community are singled out and hated by fans and treated unfairly and torn apart on social media. We need to make sure that the non-BIPOC queens on the show are role models. They actively support and educate people on the issues within the BIPOC community. And Scarlett Adams is none of that. So in my opinion, doing something as awful as she did, so often as she did it, I think is deserving of being disqualified from the competition. So that is just my opinion. So Scarlett Adams is going to go home here right after the lip sync. So Maxi Shield and etc. are going to lip sync. It was a great lip sync. And then afterwards, it'll be like a Willem situation where RuPaul is like, Scarlett Adams, it has come to my attention that you have been a racist bitch. Now, sashay away. Why couldn't we lived in that reality? I mean, really. So, moving on, we have the makeover challenge with our top 5. To me, Maxi Shield did the worst here and was definitely gonna be in the bottom. But looking at the other 4, we only know how 2 of them actually did in this challenge. Ketamine won, and I think that Ketamine would still win here. And Electroshock did well, but was put in the bottom, interestingly. So we have to figure out how would etc. do and how would Anita do. In my personal opinion, I don't see Anita doing great. I don't think Anita is that good of a makeup artist. She does fine, but she's not great. I do find issues with her makeup here and there. So I think that in a makeover challenge, putting makeup on somebody else, I think she would struggle. And we've also seen that not all of her runways were necessarily great. So I don't know what fashion she would have brought, but I think that she probably would have been in the bottom here over etc. and over Electroshock. So we're going to have a bottom 2 of Anita Wig'lit and Maxi Shield. And unfortunately, I think Maxi Shield is going to go home here. This is more of a song that I think Anita could camp up. And at this point, she has 2 wins under her belt and had been doing pretty well besides the RuCyCLED challenge, whereas Maxi was kind of struggling in certain points. So, yeah, I just don't see Maxi staying here. The lip sync that she did give to this song, I think, was her worst one that she did of her lip syncs on the show. So, I think Anita would stay and Maxi Glamour, this is not Dragula, Maxi Shield would go home. So now we have the talent show at top 4. And what would Anita do? Probably something better than everyone else. Probably something better, whether it's comedy, whether it's, I mean, I don't know what she would have done, but looking at the performances that we have here from Electroshock and Ketamine, I do think Anita could probably do better. I think that she could have definitely brought something more elevated than, eating a sandwich. So looking at the other 3, Ketamine, I think, did really, really well. It was a talent we haven't seen before, which is really hard to do. And I think that she executed it well and brought a campy element to the talent show, which I always really enjoy. Electroshock, I think she did pretty good in the talent show. It was not bottom worthy when there was 5 queens and 2 of them did absolutely nothing. But here, I do think that Ketamine did a better job overall than Electra. Not by a ton, but definitely by a little bit. And what would etc. do? I really don't know. Would she dance? Would she do comedy? I don't know. But I am going to put etc. and Electra in the bottom here. I think that we know Ketamine did a pretty good and unique talent, and I think that Anita would do something pretty funny, pretty interesting. She is an entertainer. I have confidence that she would do really well this challenge. So what would happen with an electroshock and etc. lip sync to Untouched? I think that etc. would go home. I think that they both have very similar lip sync styles with lots of, I guess you would say, like drag moves. But to me, looking at their lip syncs on the show, etc's felt like 8 counts that she had already memorized. Whereas Electra, I think, is more, what's the word, like dynamic in her moves and seems to be more like on her feet, like thinking of these things in the moment, doing an actual performance in the moment, whereas etc. felt more rehearsed. As we know, Electra kind of gave up a little bit in this lip sync, but I think a lot of the factors that led to that aren't happening in this season. You know, her being unfairly put in the bottom all the time, her having to lip sync against her best friend Ketamine, none of those factors are here. And I think that in this case, Electra would for sure fight, where because she's been in the top the last 5 weeks. So I think Electra would 100% win this lip sync over etc. And etc. would go home at the final 4. We got there. We got there with our final 3 Kiwi Queens. I was unsure when I started if this would actually happen. I know that everyone has said these would have been the final 3 if it wasn't rigged. This is who would have been at the end if RuPaul hadn't rigged the whole season. I wasn't super sure until I looked at the poll results and my own opinions, and I realized, oh, okay, yeah, this is where we ended up. So I guess everyone was right all along, and we have Anita Wig'lit, Ketamine, and Electra Shock in the final 3 of Drag Race Down Under. Now, they do their performances, they have their final runways. Who would win in this scenario? I think based on track record and fan support, it would have to be Anita Wig'lit. Like I said, I'm not like as big of an Anita stan as a lot of you guys are, so I wasn't fully sure how far she would really go in this scenario. But looking at the track record, looking at how well she did, 3 challenge wins, and just looking at how much fan support there was behind her, I think that it is pretty clear Anita would win in this scenario, with Ketamine and Electra Shock as amazing and wonderful runners-up. I must say, this is the season we deserved. This is 100% the season we deserved. Art Simone doesn't come back for no reason. Scarlett Adams doesn't win all these challenges and get to stay all the way to the end. And our 3 Kiwi Queens come out as the heroes of the season and our final 3. This is warming my heart, and from now on, I'm going to pretend like this is what happened. So thank you guys so much for watching. Again, sorry for the week and a half off, but I don't think you wanted to hear me talk like this the whole time. So I'll take my multivitamins and hopefully not get sick again anytime soon. Now that I am drenched in sweat because this room is at least 85 degrees, I'm gonna get going. But it has been a great time solving the mystery of what is the absolute worst part of 2021. It's the treatment of electroshock. So, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to follow my socials, and I will see you in the next one.